The great thing about reading comics is when you stumble upon a writer or an artist who is doing really interesting work, they hit all the right spots for you and you decide to take a deep dive into their works. For me, that creator right now is Ram V. You might know him from some of his DC work, but I am going to talk about some of his original comics that I have really enjoyed over the past few months. So I first discovered Ram V actually a couple years back when I read the Justice League Dark 2018 run. So that is the occult team of the Justice League featuring Zatanna, John Constantine, and that run specifically had Wonder Woman added into it. And it was a really fantastic run, and it really revived the concept of the Justice League Dark Squad because they first did that in the New 52, which wasn't really liked by fans. There were a lot of reasons why his particular run was more beloved by fans and just generally did better than the New 52 attempt. One being the fact that he respected these characters, he respected their origins, and he just depicted them in like a way more interesting way than the New 52 version did. And I won't go into that in depth here. I'll save that for a Zatanna review. But another thing that struck me, what I thought made his comics quite unique, was that he brought that horror edge, that vertigo edge to mainstream DC comics, which I was so impressed by. And as I got deeper into his catalog, reading more of his original stuff, I realized that he is a horror lover. And as I got deeper into his catalog, reading more of his original stuff, I realized that he is a horror enthusiast, like through and through. But to truly appreciate Ram V's talents and approach to horror, you gotta look outside the DC catalog, and I would seriously recommend you read the comic Blue in Green. It's a story about a young musician's pursuit of creative genius and discovering the dark evils that lie behind his talents and his lineage. It is so unsettling. And I say this as someone who A, loves horror, B, doesn't get spooked easily because of the amount of horror content I consume, but this was one of those things that just kind of stuck with me. The comic really pays homage to jazz as a music genre, exploring the history of jazz, especially its role in neighborhoods, communities, especially as they go through periods of financial stress, and mostly what it means to be a person with talent in the creative industry. I really appreciate when comic book writers write about creativity. I really appreciate stories written by artists about creativity, about the creative process, and I know sometimes the themes can feel a little bit overdone, especially if you're reading yet another story about a creative genius's woes about being an artist. But I can say that Ram V's approach here is very character-driven. It's a really honest and vulnerable look into ego and talent, especially in this world of ours that really kind of values that above all else. The main character here is what you would call like a washed-up musician. He was very talented from a young age, but he didn't pursue performing music professionally, so he ends up teaching at a college, but as soon as something happens in his life and he gets tempted to return to performing. And there's sort of like that deal with the devil theme going on here, which is especially popular in like jazz stories. You know, the devil goes down to Georgia and makes a deal with this fiddle player who challenges him. It's the same thing happening here. And funnily enough, reading Blue and Green made me think of parallels with Justice League Dark, because similarly to the way Zatanna's character was written with her carrying on her father's legacy as a stage magician and a superhero, this story kind of explores the pressures that come with that, the cost that comes with maintaining that power, and like the cost of fame and recognition, because Justice League Dark also explores like the cost of magic in that sense. Both of these comics asks like, what makes a person special? How does your mentorship impact you? How do you move on from the shadow of the greats? So yeah, it's just super interesting. The art style is just phenomenal. All of these really unsettling collages. It actually also reminded me of a comic that I reviewed on this channel a few months ago. This is another story about an artist struggling with creativity, which is Dave Cook's Deadliner, and I would really recommend you also read that. If you enjoyed Blue and Green, you'll also enjoy Deadliner. Now, what I also love about Ramvee's work is how he brings his Indian roots into his storytelling. And this can be seen in a lot of his comics, but the two I'm going to be talking about today is The Many Deaths of Laila Starr and These Savage Shores. The Many Deaths of Laila Starr was written by Ramvee and drawn by Filipe Andrare. The Many Deaths of Laila Starr tells a story about humanity being on the verge of discovering immortality. And as a result, the Avatar of Death is cast down to Earth to live a mortal life in Mumbai as a 20-something Laila Starr. And this Avatar of Death, inhabiting Laila's body, has to make an important decision to either try to stop humanity from discovering eternal life, therefore making her existence completely moot, or letting humanity run its course. And it's a really beautiful, really poignant story that blends in magical realist approaches. It blends in Hindu folklore, mythology. There's a really beautiful synergy here with the writing and the artwork, where everything is just so beautifully colored and drawn, and it really feels like the barriers between like the gods and mortals have been torn through, and just everything on Earth is touched with that little bit of magic. And I would seriously recommend it if you haven't read it already, especially if you don't know much about it. Again, like with most of Ramvee's works, I would actually recommend reading it with very minimal knowledge of what's inside. And similarly, These Savage Shores by Ramvee, Kumar, Astone, and Bidikar, it presents a colonial era vampire monster tale set in Calicut, 1766. I think this comic certainly benefits from having some historical knowledge as to what's going on with the East India Company, with like the British and Indian troops during that time. However, you can also appreciate it if you do have a curiosity for these things, if you're willing to go out and research some of these intricate details as I did while reading this tale. I think it will really enrich the reading experience. And especially when all the politics are going on in the background, all the wars are breaking out with all the factions. Again, it's a really impressive way to blend historical fiction, vampire fiction, monster fiction, traditional Hindu folklore into a really exciting comic book story. So I'd really recommend it. If you haven't already, go and read These Savage Shores. Finally, I won't spend too long talking about his DC work because, again, I think that his original comic books are where you would really see his talent shine. However, like I said, I have enjoyed his DC work, including Justice League Dark. I know that he's done a lot of comics in the Detective Comics run, so like the Batman stories. However, I don't think I've read many of them, so I'm not going to talk about that now. Swamp Thing is another one where he brings in his Indian perspective and his background to the mythology, which makes absolute sense because, you know, we're talking about environmental issues here. I mean, we're talking about a creature who is the embodiment of the green, who has roots all around the world. And I think especially in this modern day, when you're talking about environmental issues, it's even more important to talk about it from the angle and the perspective of those in the Southern Hemisphere, whose stories don't often get translated in mainstream media, especially in a genre, in a medium like comic books. And if I was going to recommend anything from Ramvee's recent work in DC Comics, I would recommend Aquaman Andromeda. If you've heard of this comic before, I am already impressed because, as we know, Aquaman isn't really the most popular character in the catalog. And actually in December, I recorded a video, was editing it, talking about Aquaman comics that I've been reading in anticipation of the new movie coming out. But I realized while I was editing the comic that nothing I was saying was very interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong, I read a lot of good Aquaman comics, but again, I didn't feel like I was offering anything new, except for when I was discussing Aquaman Andromeda by Ramvee. It is a cosmic horror take on the Aquaman legacy. And just as we've seen Old Man Logan and Old Man Bruce Wayne in comics, Aquaman Andromeda offers Old Man Arthur Curry with the coolest redesign I think I've seen in my lifetime, which seems like a bold claim. Zombie said that he was inspired by a lot of cosmic horror when writing Aquaman Andromeda, and I can definitely see the influences. It's very much out of the box from what you would expect in an Aquaman comic, which really explores, oftentimes a lot of his relationship with the throne, the kingdom of Atlantis, with that Shakespearean fantasy element, whereas this goes full on sci-fi in the vein of Godzilla, King Kong, like those monster movies when a group of expeditionists go down to the bottom of the ocean trying to discover something, and they hear rumors of this man in Atlantis. And this fabled creature, this rumored protector of Atlantis, comes out of the ocean depths to confront them about what they're doing. And I won't say any more because, again, I think a lot of stories are best experienced when you don't know much about it, so you can decide for yourself whether you like it or not. But I think this really worked for me. I can see why it might not for a lot of people, but I just found it so creative and interesting. And again, I love a fresh take in comics, and Ramvi is offering them on a plate for us readers. So that's the end of my video for today. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. If you've read his comics, let me know what you think of them. If there are some that I didn't talk about in this video, but you would really, really recommend, please do leave them below in the comments. And if you have a specific creator, whether that's a writer, an artist, that you've been kind of following for a while now in comics, especially someone relatively new in the space, then please do recommend. I'm always looking for new people to read, and I would love to take more recommendations. So yeah, that is the end of the video. Please do not forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!